with a new edition of the T20 Cricket World Cup 2021. We bring you a new video every day where we talk about the games that took place during the day. We cover some major milestones, some major achievements during the games, and we talk about how the results reflect on the points table to look at the team's chances of qualification for the next round. We try to see which team is climbing on the points table and which team is declining, and we take a look at the net run rate as well. We hope that you have been with us since we began this series at the beginning of the World Cup, and you're enjoying our coverage. If you have any comments, any feedback, any thoughts, please feel free to provide them to us. We would love to hear your comments and to maybe make some improvements in how we present it. So in today's edition, since the last time we presented, these three new games have taken place in Group 1. From Group 1, we have England versus Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh versus South Africa. And from Group 2, we have Pakistan versus Namibia. Now, these three games really have been as one-sided games as they could be. England beat Sri Lanka, South Africa beat Bangladesh, Pakistan beat Namibia. I mean, these results were more or less expected, but the way these games took place, for England, Josh Butler was the first person in this World Cup who was able to score a century by way of a massive six on the last ball of the inning. Sri Lanka was shot out for 137, and they lost the game by 26 runs. Even though the result seems that they were a little closer, but in reality, they were never in contention to be able to overcome England's total. Second game, Bangladesh, they batted first and they were scheduled to 84 all out, which South Africa scored with 7 overs to spare. Again, a completely one-sided game. And in Pakistan's game against Namibia, so all the conventional wisdom and recommendations that perhaps Pakistan will take it easy this time, maybe they'll test their bench strength, give other players a chance. No, none of that happened. They fielded the same strong team as the team that has won them the last few games, and they notched the second highest score in this World Cup, 189. They scored 130 runs in the last 10 overs. And Namibia was never close, even though they fought well. They fought like valiant team. 144 is all they could muster, and they lost the game by 45 runs. Namibia really showed strength, as they have shown throughout the World Cup. And all credit to them and to the team and to the management and to all the players that they have brought with them. So now let's take a quick look at the points table to see what it looks like after these two games are over. Those of you who have been with us since we began the series, they might notice a little different format this time, just because we have got a few games remaining. So we just move things a little bit around, just a little bit, to make it easier to read and to easier to understand. When everything is right there on one screen, it's easier to follow along. So let's take a look at the group. Let's first take a look at Group 1, where the situation is a little easier for us to follow. Group 2 is a little bit more complex, and we'll spend a few minutes talking about Group 2 as well. So in Group 1, we've got 4 games outstanding: Australia versus Bangladesh, West Indies versus Sri Lanka, Australia versus West Indies, and England versus South Africa. That's the last game of this round. So what's the situation looking like? England, as you can see here by just a check mark next to the name, England has already qualified for the next round. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh have no pathway to make it to the next round. The best they can do would be 2 or 4 points, and which is not enough given the situation that we have of the group right now, for them to be able to make it into the top 2. So these two have already disqualified. That leaves us with South Africa, Australia, and West Indies. And interestingly enough, they all have a pathway to make it to the next round. Australia has got the easiest path. If they are to win the last 2 remaining games against Bangladesh and against West Indies, then they would, sorry, I made a mistake here, Australia. Okay, if Australia is to win these two games, then they go on top of the leaderboard with England with 8 points each. And just because England is so far ahead on the net run rate, Australia will not be able to catch up with them, no matter how one-sided the games go. So they'll still be trailing behind England in the net run rate. And then it boils down to England's game against South Africa. If England is to win the game, then we can clearly see that the points table will remain the same. England will be on top with 5 victories and 10 points. Australia will be the second group with 8 points. And South Africa would be at 6 points. And no matter what the outcome of the last game is, it'll have no bearing on the final analysis. But if South Africa wins the last game against England, a plot twist. What happens in this case is that we now have 3 teams tied to the top of the group with 8 points apiece. England was far ahead in the net run rate, so they'll most likely still carry on as the #1 team in the group, whereas Australia and South Africa will now be fighting for the second position based on the run rate, based on the net run rate. Now, clearly, even though South Africa has got an advantage right now as we speak, but clearly in our model, Australia is playing 2 more games and they're winning them both against Bangladesh and against West Indies. So given the strong incentive they have to be able to get ahead of South Africa, so they would really have to win the games with wide margin. So if they're able to do that, then they would be able to make it to the next round, which effectively means this is what the situation would look like. If you were to ignore the last game for a moment, if this is the situation, let's give any result to the West Indies versus Sri Lanka game, just to complete the whole scorecard. Now the last game of the group round would be between England and South Africa. Going into the game, this is what the points table would look like. England on top with 8, Australia also with 8, but they'll have ended the round. South Africa would be at 6 points. Going into the game, South Africa would have a title, would have a target. They would not only have to win the game to get 2 extra points, they'll also have to get ahead of Australia on the net run rate to be able to become the second team in the group. It'll be a very interesting game, exciting game to watch. Finally, let's talk about West Indies. What does it take for them to qualify? Well, they clearly would have to win both the remaining games. Against, they'll have to beat Sri Lanka, and then they would have to beat Australia. If they do that, then they would be on top. They would be at the second position, tied with South Africa with 6 points apiece. Now, in this scenario, what needs to happen is, if Australia is to win against Bangladesh, then they'll also have 6 points along with them. So of these 3 teams, South Africa, Australia, and West Indies, the team with the best net run rate will make it to the next round. Here, West Indies has a huge disadvantage because remember, they were 55 all out in the first game against England. So they're sitting at negative 1.6 net run rate. It seems really insurmountable for them to be able to get into the positive range, 0.5 or 0.3 even, to be able to have a realistic chance of making it to the next round. But if and also for West Indies to be able to qualify, this last result has to go England's way. So South Africa does not gain any additional points. So this is a scenario that they would be hoping for. Not realistic, but then again, in theory, anything is possible. So this is what they would be hoping for. Okay, Group 1, as I said earlier, is rather easier to follow along. Group 2. Group 2 has got our work cut out in terms of how do we even assess, how do you guess what the situation is going to look like? Let's take a look at that. As you can see here, the checks and the crosses, we only have 1 check mark against Pakistan. They have made it to the next round, and no matter what happens, they cannot be uprooted. They are on top of the leaderboard. And their last game is against Scotland. No matter what the outcome is, They've made it to the next round. They've qualified. Now the remaining, interestingly enough, unlikely as it sounds, but all 5 teams have a chance to become number 2. Even Scotland. You don't believe it? Let's take a look at this. Scotland has got 3 games left against New Zealand tomorrow. Let's give that game to Scotland. They clearly have to win all 3 of the remaining games. Let's get them to beat India, and let's get them to beat Pakistan. So if they are to do that, they would be at 6 points. And now the only way for them to make it to the next round is if no other team gets to 6 points. Remember, Scotland is at negative 3.5 in the net run rate. So if any other team shows up with 6 points, they will not be able to. Scotland would not be able to compete with that team, and they will just go down. So they cannot attain the second position in this group. So for them to be able to make it, Afghanistan cannot win anymore. This means Afghanistan has to lose to India. So India gets the game against Afghanistan. Afghanistan's game against New Zealand has to win that game. And now if New Zealand at that point in time would have 4 points, and for the situation to support Scotland, Namibia has to beat New Zealand. This game has to go to Namibia, and India versus Namibia, India has to win that game. So again, as I said earlier, just a theoretic possibility, because again, I'm a mathematician and I like to play around with numbers. So anyone who does that, they can come up with all kinds of scenarios, but in reality, this is not what's going to happen. And we could just rule out the possibility for Scotland throwing up a surprise, an absolutely shocking surprise like that. Now, clearly the team is capable of doing that, but not after you have lost so heavily in the first 2 encounters that you have had. All right, so that's not an outcome. Then what's going to happen? The situation is a lot clearer for Afghanistan. They've got 2 games left against India and New Zealand. If they are to win one of the 2 games, they would be at 6 points. And given their extremely superior net run rate, they'll be at a very formidable position at 6 points. New Zealand has only played 2 games. They've got 3 games left. They only have a single loss. So they could conceivably win all 3 of the remaining games and go up to 8 points, equal Pakistan on top of the leaderboard. If that's to happen, then they clearly control their own destiny. In fact, if you were to give New Zealand the next 3 games, we can clearly see that all that wipes out all other possibilities. New Zealand. If you give them these 3 games, then no matter what the outcome is for the other games, it's more or less sealed. Afghanistan cannot make it. India cannot make it. Namibia cannot make it. And in fact, in this situation, what happens is that now we'll have 2 teams on top of the leaderboard, assuming Pakistan loses. So again, if there are 2 teams on top of the leaderboard with 8 points apiece, the net run rate will only determine their position, who is first and who's second, and not their qualification. So even if Pakistan wins against Scotland, they'll retain the first position with 10 points, and South Africa becomes second. But if Pakistan was to lose for some reasons to Scotland, they will still be on top of the leaderboard with 8 points. But then because of the loss, the net run rate could potentially go down. And because we just gave New Zealand the next 3 victories, so the net run rate will definitely be going up. And that could potentially be a situation where they could be ahead of Pakistan. So New Zealand, as we said earlier, they control their own destiny. And if they have to win the 3 remaining games, then it's a done deal, and all of the games they stop mattering. So now let's say if New Zealand does not win all 3 games, let's give them Scotland and Namibia. But let's say Afghanistan throws a plot twist, and this is what happens: Afghanistan beats New Zealand. If that's what happens, then we have both the teams at 6 points apiece. India, however, has only played two. In this situation, obviously, we're not going by chronology. We're just going by taking the games as we want to pick them, and we're giving them, putting a certain decision on them. Let's say India tomorrow is playing a crucial game against Afghanistan. It's a must-win game for India. Afghanistan is nice to win. They still have a pathway even without winning this game, but India clearly does not. So let's say India beats Namibia, which they are likely to, and let's say they also beat Afghanistan. And let's say they also beat Scotland. So if that happens, if that's what happens, oh, sorry, I missed enter it. Okay, all right. So if India was to win the remaining three games that they have, they would now be at 6 points also. So India, New Zealand, and in this situation, Afghanistan would all be at 6 points apiece, and they'd all be sharing the second spot after Pakistan, and Pakistan being with 8 points. So whether Pakistan beats Scotland or loses to them, it really has no bearing. Pakistan remains the top of the leaderboard. But in this situation, what happens is between Afghanistan, New Zealand, and India, the net run rate will determine the second best team in the group. And again, clearly, as we've said earlier multiple times, Afghanistan has a clear advantage, being so far ahead of the net run rate. India is at negative 1.61. And in just a few moments, we'll show you a calculator to figure out for any team, how do you gain on the net run rate. And that's a very nifty tool that we've developed. We would love for you to download it, play with it, give us your thoughts and feedback. And if you like it, please spread the word around and let other people come and download it as well and take advantage of that tool. So clearly, a lot is still to be determined for this group. But tomorrow is a crucial day. Tomorrow, the 3rd of November, Wednesday, New Zealand versus Scotland and India versus Afghanistan. Tomorrow, the situation will become a lot clearer in terms of where we are headed. If New Zealand is to win the game, and which they are likely to, what we have covered earlier, New Zealand being able to control their own destiny, that will, of course, continue. But Afghanistan versus India is a crucial game. Let's just keep our fingers crossed. Let's get ready to watch a very exciting game. Clearly, a lot at stake for both the teams, and let's just have fun. Okay, so as a last part of this episode, let's go ahead and share with you a net run rate calculator that we are now launching with today's episode. It seems a little hodgepodge, but once we walk you through it, you would see that it's not quite that complicated for us to use. So anyone with some basic sense of numbers should be able to just play along and figure things out. It's really not that hard for anyone to follow along. Okay, so how do you use it? Step number 1, select a team. Let's say let's stay with South Africa. Okay, so right now, the moment you select a team, all the games that they have played, all the runs they have scored, all the overs they have batted, the current run rate that the team has scored at, and for the opposition, how many runs the opposition opponents have scored, how many overs they have faced, the run rate, and then the net run rate, which is 6.91 in this case, minus 6.15, which gives us 0.76. And let's say they need to go up to 1.35. So step number 1, pick a team. Step number 2, enter the target net run rate. Let's say they need to go up to 1.35. So now there are two scenarios. And this is again based on a single game. If South Africa is batting first, then what needs to happen? Let's say they bat first, and they score 200 runs. If they score 200, then they must restrict the opposition to 130 runs. And if they do it, then as we can see in this situation, they'll have reached the target run rate. Let's say they only score 155. Now it becomes a little harder. Now they have to restrict the opposition to 81 runs. If the opposition scores more than 81, then clearly they'll fail to meet the target of 1.35 net run rate. So this is one scenario where they are batting first. For any team which is in this kind of a situation, they are really advised to follow a calculator like this and always try to field first. This is what it looks like if you were to field first. Let's say the target is still the same. You are sitting at 0.76. Your target is 1.35. And now this is the situation. The South Africa is now fielding first. In this case, let's say the opponents bat first and they score 150. South Africa now will have to reach the target in 11.2 overs and not the whole 20 overs. They have to reach 150 in 11.2 overs, scoring at the rate of 13.1. And if they are able to do that, then they'll have, if you do the final computation, you'll see that they'll have hit the target run rate. As you can see here, it's really to their benefit to restrict the opposition. So let's say they're able to keep them to 120 in this game. So now they have to get to the target in 10.4 overs, only scoring at 11.18. It becomes a lot more manageable. Using the same tool, if you were to use a different team, let's say you are talking about Afghanistan, and you want your current net run rate is 3.1 and you want to get to 1.35, gives you a warning that, hey, what you're trying to do is not right. You are beyond the net current run rate. Just maintain that and you're home. So the calculations here would not be accurate. So again, as we said, we're very proud of this tool. It's very useful. Please go ahead and download it, share it with others, and hope you enjoy it. Hope you have fun with it. And come back tomorrow for a new episode of two very exciting games, New Zealand versus Scotland, Afghanistan versus India. A lot is clearly at stake. And we're going to come back here tomorrow and let's continue to have fun. Let's continue to enjoy the remaining parts of this World Cup. And best wishes to you, best wishes to the team that you are following, that you're supporting, and let the best teams win. Have a wonderful day.